There is a place on this earth where 5 of the world's greatest mountain ranges collide in a single knot of rock and ice so violent, so impossibly vast, that geographers had to invent a name just to describe it. They called it the Pamir Knot, and at its center, landlocked, ancient, and almost entirely unknown to the world that endlessly defines it, lies Afghanistan. Most people come to this name carrying the weight of decades of headlines. War, conflict, crisis. And yet the moment you actually look, truly look, at what this land contains, something shifts. Something in you goes quiet, because what you are looking at is not a country defined by its wounds. You are looking at one of the most geographically extraordinary, historically layered, and humanly complex places on the surface of this planet. And almost nobody talks about that. The first thing you notice, flying over Afghanistan, is the scale of contrast. From above, the country reads like 2 different worlds stitched together. In the south and west, there are deserts so flat and featureless they look like a sea of dried clay, bleached to the color of old bone. The Registan, a name that simply means land of sand, stretches across the southwest in low red dunes, ancient and utterly indifferent to the modern world. But then the land rises. It rises so suddenly that from the air the transition looks like a collision. The flat desert simply ends, and in its place the Hindu Kush erupts. Peak after jagged peak, ridge after broken ridge, the mountains fold into each other in a chaos of gray stone and white snow for hundreds of kilometers. These are not gentle mountains. The Hindu Kush, a name that ancient Persian travelers translated as killer of Hindus, a reference to the slaves who died crossing its frozen passes, reaches heights above 7,700 meters. In summer, its flanks are threaded with narrow tracks that have carried armies, merchants, and mystics for 5,000 years. The Wakhan Corridor is Afghanistan's finger stretched toward China. A narrow panhandle, sometimes only 15 kilometers wide, flanked by the Karakoram and the Hindu Kush, rising to peaks above 6,000 meters under permanent snow. In the broad, U-shaped valleys of the Little Pamir, Waki and Kyrgyz herders still live in stone villages with their yaks and goats, following seasonal routes their ancestors established centuries before any nation-state thought to draw a border across this landscape. It is, by any measure, one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. But here is what the travel guides will never show you. In the dead center of the Hindu Kush, at an elevation of nearly 3,000 meters, surrounded by gray-pink limestone cliffs and a landscape so arid it resembles the surface of the moon, there are lakes. 6 of them, and they are the most improbable, most impossibly vivid blue you have ever seen in your life. Bandiamir. NASA, looking down from orbit, described them as splashes of blue in an otherwise monotonous lunar landscape. That description does not do them justice. The water at Bandiamir is not simply blue. It moves between colors the way a gem moves in light. lapis lazuli at the deep center, turquoise at the shallows, sapphire where the cliffs cast their shadows. None of it is man-made. None of it is engineered. These lakes exist because of one of the rarest geological processes on Earth. Over thousands of years, calcium-rich spring water dissolved limestone from the mountains and redeposited it in curving walls, natural travertine dams, rising up to 12 meters high, that trapped the water in a chain of glowing basins. One lake overflows into the next. The largest, Band-e-Haibat, the Dam of Awe, creates an effect so surreal, water cascading silently over its white mineral lip into the basin below, that Afghan legend could not explain it in geological terms. They said, Ali, the Prophet's son-in-law, created these waters by miracle. And standing at the edge, watching that blue defy the gray world surrounding it, you understand completely why someone would believe that. Afghanistan established Band-e-Amir as its first national park in 2009. Over 100,000 visitors came in 2023. Barely a few hundred were international tourists. Which means all of this, exists almost entirely unseen by the outside world. A few hundred kilometers to the southeast, the Bamiyan Valley tells a different kind of story. Cradled within the Hindu Kush at 2,500 meters, the valley is wide and green, its floor dotted with poplar trees and mud brick compounds. But what draws the eye, what has drawn every traveler's eye, from the Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang in the 7th century to the journalists and scholars of the 20th, are the cliffs. Or more precisely, what used to be in the cliffs. For 14 centuries, 2 colossal Buddhas stood here. Carved directly into the sandstone, the larger reaching 55 meters, roughly the height of a 15-story building. Once painted crimson red, both of them gilded, catching the sun like beacons for the Silk Road traders passing below. For 1,000 years, they were proof that Afghanistan, long before its current identity, was a place where Buddhism flourished, where Greek and Indian civilizations blended, where sacred art was carved on a scale that staggered the imagination. In March 2001, over 25 days, they were destroyed. What remains today are 2 enormous empty niches in the cliff face. Hollow, irregular wounds in the stone. Around them, hundreds of ancient Buddhist caves still punctuate the rock. Some of them now, quietly and without ceremony, home to Afghan families. Children play in the cave mouths. Laundry hangs on lines strung between openings that once held painted frescoes. Life continues in the shadow of what was lost. But here is the thing about Afghanistan that the world misses entirely. This land has been scribed and erased, built and destroyed again and again across 5 millennia. Alexander the Great passed through and left cities behind. The Silk Road ran through here and left the entire world changed. Empires have crashed against these mountains and broken apart, while the valleys between them continued. season after season, with the planting and the harvest, the tea and the prayer, the family gathered at dusk. Not the headlines, not the history of invasions, but the realization, slow and then sudden, that this land has been outlasting everyone who ever tried to define it. That the mountains standing silent over Bamiyan's empty niches were standing there before the Buddhas were carved. That the blue water of Band-e-Amir was glowing in its limestone basins 1,000 years before any army marched past it. They have been defined by this land, by its scale and its beauty and its absolute, uncompromising refusal to be anything other than what it is. Afghanistan, a place that does not ask for your understanding, only your attention. Nobody tells you this about Afghan cities. They don't feel like cities in the way the modern world has trained you to understand that word. No gleaming towers of glass, no sanitized pedestrian zones, no careful, curated version of itself presented for outside consumption. Afghan cities are raw, they are layered. They smell of grilled meat and exhaust and cardamom and something older, something that has been accumulating in these streets for centuries and has no name in any language you already speak. They are, in the truest sense of the word, alive. The first thing you notice about Kabul is the altitude. The city sits at 1,790 meters, cradled in a narrow mountain valley, and the air has a particular quality, thinner than you expect, bright in a way that makes colors sharper. In the early morning, the mountains ringing the city are perfectly clear. The call to prayer threads through the cold air, from a dozen minarets at once, each slightly out of sync. So the adhan arrives not as a single sound, but as a layered, overlapping conversation between towers. Then the morning begins, and everything changes. Kabul does not ease into its day. It detonates into it. The streets fill with a density of movement that feels physically improbable. Trucks loaded with vegetables, motorcycles threading gaps that don't logically exist. Handcarts piled with everything from watermelons to spare car parts. Men in shalwar kameez and men in western jackets and men in both at once, the city wearing its contradictions openly without apology. Walk into Puli Kishti Bazaar and the city reaches into you through every sense simultaneously. Dried fruit in mountains, golden raisins, dark mulberries, apricots the color of sunset, spilling from open sacks. Spices in shallow trays, turmeric the yellow of raw sunlight, saffron threads weighed on scales more delicate than jewelry counters. Deeper in, butchers work in the open air, whole carcasses hanging on iron hooks. The sound is its own architecture, the rhythmic hammering of a metalsmith shaping copper. The murmur of two men negotiating over glasses of tea, voices low and unhurried, as if the transaction is secondary to the relationship. And then there is Chicken Street. Kuche Murga carries a ghost inside it. In in the 1960s and 1970s, this was one of the great stops on the hippie trail, the overland route from Europe to India. Western travelers came for carpets and lapis lazuli, for hand-hammered silver jewelry, for the atmosphere of a city that felt like the crossroads of all civilizations. Walking it today is an act of layered time. You are standing in the present, but the present is standing on decades of history that have not been cleared away, only built over. Kabul holds its contradictions without resolving them. That is its nature, and somehow, in that refusal to resolve, it becomes one of the most honest cities on earth. 400 kilometers to the west lies a city that has been called the Pearl of Khorasan. The Florence of the East, the city of 1,000 scholars. None of those names are exaggerations. Herat was already a major center of civilization when Alexander the Great passed through in 330 BCE. The Silk Road ran directly through it. The Timurid dynasty made it, in the 15th century, one of the greatest cultural capitals in the Islamic world. A city of poets, astronomers, painters, and architects working at a level that contemporary Europe would not surpass for another century. What the Timurids left behind is the Friday Mosque. The moment you understand why people never leave Herat is the moment you walk out of the dark entrance corridor and the courtyard opens before you. It is almost 100 meters long. And every surface is covered in mosaic tilework of such density, such precision, that it takes a moment for the brain to process what the eyes are receiving. Blues in every shade, from pale morning sky to the deepest lapis. Whites and creams and golds woven through in geometric patterns that repeat and shift and never quite lock into a predictable rhythm. Bands of Quranic calligraphy curving around arches. The tile workshop that maintains its exterior has been producing and replacing mosaics since the 1940s, the craftsmen working with the same techniques, the same pigments that Timurid tile masters used 600 years ago. In the early morning, the light catches the tiles at an angle that makes the entire western wall appear to glow from within. Not reflect, glow. Stand there long enough, and you will understand why Islamic architecture placed such complete faith in geometric pattern. Because what you are looking at is not decoration. It is an argument, made in fired clay and mineral pigment, for the existence of something infinite. Herat is also the city of saffron. In the cool autumn mornings of October and November, tens of thousands of small purple crocus flowers open for just a few hours each day. Pickers, the vast majority women, move through the rows harvesting by hand, pulling 3 crimson stigmas from each flower with practiced fingers. It takes 150,000 flowers to produce a single kilogram. Afghan saffron has been named the finest in the world 9 consecutive times. The world's most expensive spice, grown here by these hands, There is a moment in Mazar-i-Sharif that nobody prepares you for. You approach the Blue Mosque through the city streets, past traffic and market stalls. And then you pass through the gate into the mosque's gardens. And the city simply stops. The sound of traffic is replaced by the soft, continuous cooing of approximately 10,000 white doves. They are everywhere, on the domes, on the minarets, on the shoulders of pilgrims who stand perfectly still and let them land. The Blue Mosque is not blue the way paint is blue. It is blue the way water is blue, different in every light, shifting between turquoise and cobalt, and a deep, almost violet shade depending on the hour and the sun. Its domes catch the morning light and hold it. Its minarets taper upward in bands of geometric tilework, so fine they seem impossible at that scale. The legend says this is the burial site of Ali ibn Abi Talib, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. Whether or not the historical claim holds, what is not in debate is what this place means to the people who come here. Old men who have traveled for days. Mothers with children. Young men standing at the edge of the reflecting pool in silence. Another legend says any dove arriving with colored feathers will turn pure white within 40 days. Watched the doves here, their improbable whiteness against the blue domes and green garden, and the legend feels less like superstition than the natural response of a people who look at something inexplicably beautiful and reach, instinctively, for a language adequate to it. And then there is Kandahar, the south, the Pashtun heartland, a city the world regards almost entirely through its recent history. What nobody tells you is that Kandahar is a city of gardens. The Arghandab River runs through the valley, and along its banks the land is green in a way that seems extravagant, given the desert surrounding it. Orchards and vineyards and long rows of pomegranate trees. The variety grown here, large, deep ruby, seed so heavy with juice they burst at the slightest pressure, has been called simply the best in the world. Botanists believe Afghanistan may be one of the original homelands of the wild pomegranate, which means the fruit has been growing here, in this particular light and soil, for longer than most human civilizations have existed. That is Kandahar, a city that contains, quietly, behind its walls and in its orchards, a depth of history and beauty that has nothing to do with headlines. That is, in a sense, Afghanistan itself. There is a sound that every Afghan knows before they know anything else. It comes in the darkness, before the sun has touched the mountain peaks, before the bazaars have opened. It rises from the minarets, not from one, but from many, each voice slightly different, layering over each other across the rooftops like a net of sound cast over the whole city. The adhan, the call to prayer. For the outside world, this is often described as background, local color. But for the people who live inside it, the adhan is not background. It is the architecture of the day itself. It is how time is organized, how a person is reminded, repeatedly and without compromise, of where they stand in relation to something larger than themselves. The day begins in the dark. After Fajr prayer, the house begins to wake properly, and in cities like Kabul and Herat, this means the sound of the tandoor. The neighborhood baker, awake since before the adhan, feeds his clay oven until the interior walls reach a heat you can feel from the doorway. In minutes, the naan is done, blistered, slightly charred at the edges, the interior soft and steaming. Customers arrive carrying cloth to wrap it in, walking home with the bread still warm against their chests. This bread is not a side dish in Afghanistan. It is the meal. It is the utensil. It is the thing around which everything else is organized. If a piece falls to the floor, it is picked up and placed somewhere elevated, on a wall, a ledge, so it is not stepped on. In a country where that labor is rarely easy, that matters. In the villages, the morning is shaped by different demands. Children carry containers to the communal spring or the Kerez's outlet. The ancient underground water channel, delivering mountain groundwater to the surface after traveling, in some cases, many kilometers underground. The first chai of the morning is brewed over a small fire, drunk in small glasses in the quiet before the physical work of the day begins. If the home is the private heart of Afghan life, the bazaar is its public nervous system. The layout follows a pattern so old it predates the concept of urban planning. Trades cluster together. The metalworkers in one lane, their hammers ringing in a percussion that carries 3 streets away. The fabric sellers in another, bolts of cloth in emerald and saffron and deep crimson stacked to the ceiling. The spice dealers presiding over open sacks with the quiet confidence of men who know what they are selling is irreplaceable. The bazaar has a smell that exists nowhere else on earth. Not a single smell, but a palimpsest of smells, the warm breath of fresh naan from around a corner. The sharp mineral note of raw lapis lazuli. The dark, resinous perfume of oud wood chips smoldering at a carpet shop entrance. The dusty sweetness of dried apricots. And beneath all of it, the particular smell of sun-warmed mud brick. The smell of the city thinking out loud. A purchase in an Afghan bazaar does not begin with a price. It begins with a greeting, then an inquiry about health, then about family, then tea, drunk unhurriedly, while the real conversation circles slowly toward its purpose. This is not inefficiency. It is a system of trust building that predates every modern financial instrument by millennia. In a society where contracts are rarely written, the relationship is the guarantee. At the heart of the bazaar is the chaikhana, the tea house. A room fitted with low platforms and cushions, a samovar bubbling in the corner. Tea arrives in small individual pots, accompanied by a small dish of nukul, sugar-coated almonds, or pressed dried mulberry. The chai khana is not really about tea. It is about the thing that tea makes possible, which is time. Unhurried, unscheduled time. Business deals are made here, disputes are resolved. Travelers arriving from distant provinces share what they have seen along the road. Old men tell stories that their fathers told them, and the young men listen, not because they are required to, but because the stories are good and the afternoon is long. What the travel guides won't say is that the chai khana is a social equalizer. The wealthy merchant and the day laborer sit on the same cushions, drink from the same small glasses. The currency here is not money but conversation. There is a concept in Afghan life with no direct English translation. It is called hashar. Understanding it is, perhaps more than anything else, the key to understanding how Afghan society has survived what it has survived. Hashar is communal labor, voluntary, unpaid, and expected. If a family needs to build a new room, they don't hire contractors. They tell their neighbors. On the appointed day, the neighbors come, all of them. By evening, what one family could not have accomplished in weeks is done. No money changes hands. No debt is recorded. The implicit understanding is that when your neighbor needs the same, you will be there. This is not charity. Charity implies a hierarchy of need. Hashar is the community acting as a single organism, redistributing labor the way a healthy body redistributes blood. You see it in the maintenance of the keras, the ancient underground irrigation channels. These channels belong to the community. When they need cleaning, the entire village turns out. Every household contributes labor proportional to its water usage. No one oversees this. No one enforces it. It simply happens because everyone understands. If it doesn't happen, the water stops. This is the social infrastructure of Afghanistan. Invisible from the outside. More durable than anything ever built with foreign aid or government planning. As the sun drops behind the mountains, the bazaar empties. The last call to prayer sounds, and the evening belongs to the family. Behind the courtyard walls, the high mud brick enclosures that define Afghan domestic space, the household gathers. The dastarkhan is spread on the floor. Dishes placed at the center. Everyone takes from the center. No one eats alone. After the meal, the tea. After the tea, the conversation. A grandmother telling a story. Children falling asleep against the wall while the adults talk, unwilling to miss a word and unable to stay awake for it. This is the part of Afghanistan that never makes it into the headlines. The ordinary evening, the warm room, the rhythm that has outlasted everything that has ever tried to stop it. What does it mean to be Afghan? The answer is not simple. In a country where 5 major ethnic groups speak different languages, follow different customs, remember different histories. But running beneath the diversity threading through the Pashtun south, and the Tajik north, and the Hazara highlands, and the Uzbek plains, there is something consistent. A set of values so deeply held they operate not as rules but as reflexes. The Pashtuns are the largest group, organized around an ancient code called Pashtunwali, producing warriors and poets, kings and farmers in roughly equal measure. The Tajiks, Persian-speaking, historically urban, carry the literary and intellectual tradition, maintaining a continuous connection to the Persian literary world for over 1,000 years. The Hazaras occupy the Central Highlands, visually distinct in ways that have been used against them across Afghan history. Their resilience in the face of marginalization is one of the quiet, insufficiently told stories of this country. In the north, Uzbeks and Turkmen maintain living connections to the Central Asian world across the Amu Darya, their identity predating every border drawn through this region. These groups share something more durable than political agreement: a landscape, a climate, a set of fundamental values around hospitality and honor and faith that express themselves differently in each community while remaining, at their core, recognizably the same. Of all the cultural frameworks shaping Afghan life, none is more ancient or more genuinely misunderstood than Pashtunwali, a complete system for living. A code of behavior, unwritten and unlegislated, enforced entirely by community pressure and personal honor. It predates Islam by centuries, though Islam was absorbed into it smoothly, like a river joining a larger river without changing the current's direction. At its center is Nang, honor, not abstract honor, honor as the actual substance of a person's existence. A Pashtun proverb captures it: death is preferable to a life of shame. Melmastia, hospitality, is perhaps the pillar most visible to outsiders. Under Melmastia, any guest, regardless of origin, religion, or wealth, is entitled to the protection and provision of their host. A stranger who arrives asking for shelter will be given the best room in the house, the best food. The host will go into debt to provide it, because the alternative, turning a guest away, is a stain on the family name that does not wash out. Nanawatai, sanctuary, is its corollary. If even a sworn enemy approaches your home and invokes Nanawatai, you are obligated to give it. You must protect him. The feud is suspended for the duration of his stay. This is not a hypothetical. It is a practice documented across Pashtun history, one that has placed families in extraordinary danger because refusing sanctuary was simply unthinkable. Jirga, the Council of Elders, resolves disputes without state authority. The elders hold no formal power. Their authority derives entirely from their age, wisdom, and reputation. And yet their decisions carry more weight than any court ruling. There is a sport played in northern Afghanistan that no category of athletic competition adequately describes. It is called buzkashi, literally, goat grabbing, a headless calf, soaked in cold water for 24 hours, weighing up to 50 kilograms, is placed in a circle on a field. Dozens of horsemen compete to seize it, carry it around a distant flag, and return it to the circle. What happens between start and finish is unlike anything else called sport on this planet. There are no fixed rules, no boundaries. The horses, powerful, specially trained animals worth tens of thousands of dollars, are not ridden so much as aimed. The riders use their horses as weapons, cutting off rivals, forcing a path to the carcass with sheer mass and momentum. And yet there is a beauty to it that photographs cannot capture. The moment when a single Chapandaz breaks free of the pack, his horse flat out, ears back, the carcass swinging from his fist, 50 riders in pursuit, is one of the most viscerally thrilling things a human being can witness. The wealthy Khans who sponsor riders and horses demonstrate their power through their Chapandaz's performance. A public display of the values Afghan culture prizes most: strength, skill, audacity. Banned under the first Taliban government as immoral. Playing again now, on winter Fridays to crowds of thousands. Some things cannot be stopped. They simply wait. If buzkashi is Afghan cultural life at its most kinetic, the rubab is its sound at its most intimate. Afghanistan's national instrument is carved from a single block of mulberry wood into a shape resembling a short-necked lute. It has 3 melody strings and up to 15 sympathetic strings that vibrate in response to the melody, creating a shimmering resonance that rings for seconds after the note is played. The Smithsonian describes the sound as haunting. That is the right word. The rubab does not simply produce music. It produces an atmosphere, a quality of air in the room that is different after it is played. In 2024, UNESCO recognized rubab making as an element of intangible cultural heritage. The Metropolitan Museum of Art notes the rubab may be the direct ancestor of the sarod, meaning that one of the great musical traditions of human civilization carries inside it a genetic memory of Afghanistan. If you have the chance to hear a rubab played by a master, in a private home, in a tea house, do not let it pass. The sound will stay with you longer than anything else from this country. There is a carpet in a market somewhere in the world right now, in Istanbul, London, New York, Dubai, that was woven by a woman in northern Afghanistan. She sat at a vertical loom for months, knotting individual threads of wool, each knot tied by hand, cut by hand, until a pattern emerged. Deep red field, geometric medallions called gul, meaning both flower and tribe, repeating in precise rows. Each gul a symbol of the weaving family's tribal identity, as distinctive as a name. A single square meter contains between 100,000 and 400,000 individual knots. The woman who made it learned the patterns from her mother, who learned from her mother, in a line of transmission reaching back through generations. Between 1.2 and 1.5 million Afghans depend on carpets for their livelihood. Nearly 90% of those in weaving and wool spinning are women. And then there are the war rugs. Since the Soviet invasion of 1979, Afghan weavers have been doing something with no precedent in the history of textile art. They have been weaving the war into the carpets. Literally. The traditional geometric gull began to change shape in the 1980s. The flowing bote resolved into the silhouette of a Kalashnikov. Tank treads replaced interlocking geometric borders. Helicopter gunships hovered in fields that once held flowers. These are not protest art designed for gallery walls. They are something stranger and more profound. The instinctive response of a people whose entire cultural memory is stored in textile, who encode everything that matters in pattern and color, encountering a violence so total it could not be left out of the weaving without lying about the world the weaver was living in. Art historian Nigel Lendon called them the highest tradition of war art in the 20th century. They are also the most honest document of what this country has experienced, because they do not explain or contextualize. They simply show, in the only language the weaver had, what the world looked like from where she was sitting. No account of Afghan identity is complete without the poetry. In Afghanistan, poetry is not a specialized cultural product consumed by an educated class. It is the common language of emotion, of philosophy, of love and loss and faith and doubt. A Pashtun shepherd reciting Kushal Khan Ka Tak by memory on a mountainside. An old woman in Herat quoting Rabia Balkhi, the 10th century poetess, possibly the first woman to write in the New Persian literary tradition, as naturally as she quotes a proverb. And above all, Rumi, Jalal al-Din Muhammad Balkhi, was born in 1207 in or near the city of Balkh, the ancient city in northern Afghanistan, that Alexander called the most beautiful in all of Asia. Afghans call him Balkhi, their own. Iran calls him Rumi. Turkey calls him Mevlana. He belongs to all of them, and to something larger. To the Persian literary and spiritual tradition that stretches across national borders like weather. But he was born here, under these mountains, and the fact that the world's most widely read poet in the English language came from a valley in northern Afghanistan is one of the most startling, most completely overlooked facts about this country. When an Afghan quotes poetry in conversation, and they do regularly, they are not showing off. They are reaching for the most precise instrument available to say something true. In a culture where poetry has been the primary technology for conveying complex meaning for over 1,000 years, the poem is simply the most accurate tool for the job. That is Afghan identity, the poem, the carpet, the rubab, the code of honor that says a stranger at your door is sacred. The game played on horseback with a fury that looks like chaos and operates, to those who understand it, with the precision of a language. There is a moment that happens in every Afghan home, at every meal. that no restaurant in the world has successfully replicated. It is the moment the dasturkhan is spread. A large cloth unrolled across the floor. The family settling cross-legged around its edges. The dishes arriving, placed at the center within reach of everyone simultaneously. No individual plates, no assigned portions, no hierarchy of who gets the best piece. The food is communal from the moment it leaves the kitchen. Everyone eats from the center. Everyone is, by the simple geometry of the dasturkhan, equal. This is not merely a style of eating. It is a statement of values enacted 3 times a day across a country of 40 million people. If you want to understand Afghanistan through a single dish, eat Kabuli pulao. This is Afghanistan's national dish, the dish every Afghan, regardless of ethnic background, recognizes as the expression of home. Served at weddings and funerals, at Eid, and at the welcoming of a guest who has traveled far. The foundation is basmati rice, cooked in a lamb broth with char masala, cumin, cardamom, cinnamon, black pepper. That, once you have smelled it reducing in a pot, becomes permanently associated in your memory with warmth and welcome. Then finished in dam, sealed and steamed over low heat until every grain is separate and perfectly tender. And then the crown. Julienned carrots caramelized in oil and sugar until they soften into something between vegetable and confection. Dark raisins scattered through, slivered almonds toasted golden, the warm, sweet caramel notes of the carrots, cutting through the savory depth of the lamb-scented rice in a combination that should not work as well as it does. Serving Kabuli pulao is always an act of generosity, a statement that for this occasion, for this guest, nothing has been held back. Mantu are dumplings, thin pasta circles filled with ground lamb, diced onion, and a restrained blend of cumin and black pepper. Pleated and sealed by hand, each one a small act of craft. What arrives at the table is the dumpling drowned in layered sauces, a garlicky yogurt at the base, a tomato sauce enriched with chickpeas over it, dried mint scattered over everything. Hot dumpling, cool yogurt, earthy chickpeas, fragrant mint contrast as the engine of flavor. In Afghan homes, mantu is prepared for guests. Not because it's expensive, but because it's time-consuming. The act of making it is an expression of care, a way of saying you were worth my time. Bolani, flatbread stuffed with potato or spinach, pan-fried until golden, served with thick strained yogurt. Korma, the great category of slow-cooked stews, absorbing whatever is available and returning it transformed. And threading through all of it, chai. Always in small glasses, always sweet, arriving before the food and remaining long after it is finished. The constant, the backdrop, the thing that keeps the conversation moving when the afternoon stretches ahead with nowhere particular to be. There is a crop grown in the fields around Herat that costs more per kilogram than gold. The saffron grown in western Afghanistan, awarded by the Brussels-based International Taste Institute 9 consecutive times, is the finest in the world. The plant is a small purple crocus that flowers in October and November for only a few hours each morning. During those hours, pickers move through the rows extracting 3 crimson stigmas from each flower by hand. It takes 150,000 flowers to produce a single kilogram. The pickers are overwhelmingly women. One of the few spaces in contemporary Afghanistan where women's labor is not only permitted but essential, because the work requires a precision that, as every saffron grower will tell you, women perform better than anyone else. It comes from here, from these fields, from these hands moving through rows of purple flowers in the October dawn. And the pomegranate. In Kandahar in October, the markets fill with them. The size of grapefruits, their skin tight and waxy, the interior a packed cathedral of seeds, each one holding juice so intensely sweet and tart that the first taste registers as something close to shock. The pomegranate appears in carpet designs, in architectural ornament, in poetry. A symbol of the idea that one thing can contain multitudes, that what appears as a single hard exterior holds inside it an entire world of sweetness. There is perhaps no better symbol for Afghanistan itself. The table is always set. The dasturkhan is always spread. You only have to come. There is an engineering marvel running beneath your feet in rural Afghanistan. You cannot see it. There is no sign marking its existence. It is called a keres, and it has been keeping people alive for over 2,000 years. Afghanistan is semi-arid across most of its territory. The mountains hold enormous quantities of water, locked in glaciers, trickling through gravel aquifers at the base of every major range. But the fields that need that water are in valleys below, often kilometers away, where building surface canals would expose every drop to the merciless evaporation of a Central Asian summer sun. The people who developed the keres solved this with breathtaking simplicity. They went underground. A keres begins at the foot of a mountain, where a master well is dug down to the water table. From this mother well, a tunnel is excavated horizontally, sloping very gently, sometimes only 1 meter of drop for every 1,000 meters of horizontal distance, until it emerges at the surface kilometers away as a flowing spring in what was previously dry ground. The genius is in the slope, too steep, and the water erodes the tunnel walls. Too flat, and the water stalls. The correct gradient, achieved by generations of builders, measuring with nothing more than a string weighted with a stone, keeps the water moving at exactly the right speed. From above, a keres is visible only as a dotted line of small mounds stretching across the landscape like stitches in dry skin. Afghanistan historically had between 6,000 and 7,000 keres systems, irrigating more than 160,000 hectares. The water that emerges is cool even in midsummer, clean, and delivered by gravity alone, a pump that has run continuously, requiring no energy input for 2,000 years. The Keres is not merely an irrigation system. It is the physical infrastructure of Afghan civilization. Every major settlement in the arid zones grew up around a Keres outlet. Maintaining it operates on the same principle as Hashar. Every household contributes labor proportional to its water usage. No one is paid. The alternative to collective maintenance is collective thirst. Many Keres have dried up in recent decades, victims of drought, diesel bore wells, and years of conflict that prevented maintenance. The disappearance of each Keres is the disappearance of the civilization it sustained, quietly, leaving behind only the dotted line of shaft mounds in the dry ground and the memory of the water that once ran beneath them. Afghanistan was once one of the world's great horticultural countries. In the 1960s, high-value fruit and dried fruit provided nearly half of Afghanistan's total export revenue. The Shamali plain north of Kabul produces grapes of exceptional quality. The agricultural tradition of cultivating vines outlasting every political and religious restriction placed upon it. The northern provinces produce fat, sweet almonds. Mulberries drop in such quantity during summer that children arrive home with hands and lips the color of bruises. Approximately 1.5 million Afghans, roughly 4% of the population, are kushi, pastoral nomads organized around the twice-yearly movement of animals between lowland winter pastures and high mountain pastures of summer. Their sheep and goats and camels cover hundreds of kilometers on paths held only in the accumulated knowledge of the families that walk them. The image is extraordinary. A kushi family on the move, the women in elaborately embroidered dresses of deep red and black household goods carried on camels moving with slow, rocking dignity through mountain passes. The whole assembly moving through a landscape that seems made for exactly this kind of purposeful passage. But the kushi way of life is under pressure. The droughts of the late 1990s killed an estimated 75% of livestock in some areas. The border fence Pakistan has been constructing along the Durand Line cuts off winter pastures that kushi families have used for generations. Landmines have killed kushi animals and people in numbers no registry fully captures. When the last family stops following the ancient migration routes, the ecological knowledge they carry, which pastures recover fastest, which springs are reliable in drought years, will be gone. It will not be written down. The Afghan carpet industry employs 1.2 to 1.5 million people, nearly 90% of them women. The wool begins with fat-tailed Karakul sheep. The yarn dyed traditionally with materials the landscape provides. Pomegranate rind for yellows, walnut husks for browns, madder root for the deep reds that are the signature of Afghan Turkmen work. 10,000 knots a day for a skilled weaver. several million knots for a large carpet. Months or years of work. What emerges will outlast the weaver, the loom, and the house the loom stood in. A well-made Afghan carpet, properly cared for, will last 200 years. Beyond the carpet loom, the Afghan economy operates in spaces no development report fully captures. The money changer, who tracks exchange rates in real time. The truck driver running a freight route that no logistics company operates. The teenager repairing mobile phones from a mat in the bazaar, having taught himself from tutorial videos on the same phones he now fixes. The formal systems have failed repeatedly and comprehensively. And yet the economy persists, built on social capital and the accumulated trust of generations. Doing what the Karez does, finding the gradient, going underground when necessary, and emerging, kilometers later, as a flowing spring in dry ground. The water always finds a way, so do the people. There is a photograph taken in Kabul in the 1960s that most people who see it refuse to believe is real. Women in miniskirts and headscarves walking side by side. Both styles, both choices, both present without tension or comment. A university campus with mixed classes. A city with jazz clubs and poetry readings whose cosmopolitan intellectual life drew comparison to Beirut and Tehran at their most open. That Kabul existed. It was not a fantasy. It was a real city at a particular moment, navigating its own path toward modernity, slowly and on its own terms, without the catastrophic interruptions that were still to come. The modern chapter of Afghanistan's suffering begins in April 1978 with a coup that brought a communist government to power and began a forced modernization so brutal it generated, within months, a nationwide armed resistance. The Soviet Union sent its army across the Amu Darya in December 1979. 100,000 troops, attack helicopters, the most powerful military's machine the world had yet produced, deployed against farmers and herders who had never asked to be in the Cold War. What followed was 10 years of war that killed between 1 and 2 million Afghans. 5 million more fled to Pakistan and Iran, creating the largest refugee population on Earth. Agricultural infrastructure, the Karez systems, the orchards, the irrigation networks built over centuries, was systematically destroyed. The Soviets withdrew in 1989, and then the Civil War began. The Mujahideen factions fractured along ethnic and political lines the moment the common enemy was gone. From 1992 to 1996, Kabul, which had survived the entire Soviet war with its urban fabric intact, was destroyed from within. Rockets fired from the hills, by one faction landing in neighborhoods controlled by another. The Kabul Museum looted, its Gandharan Buddhist art and Bactrian gold scattered across the international antiquities market. The National Archives burned, an entire city's memory deliberately erased in 4 years. The Taliban took Kandahar in 1994, then Kabul in 1996. They brought order of a kind and restrictions on daily life, particularly for women, that had no precedent in Afghan history. Girls' schools closed, music was banned, the rubab went silent, kite flying was declared immoral and stopped. In March 2001, they destroyed the Bamiyan Buddhas, an announcement, made in stone and TNT, of a particular vision of what Afghanistan was and what it was not permitted to remember about itself. 6 months later, September 11 brought the American-led invasion, the fall of the Taliban, and the beginning of a 20-year international presence that built schools and roads and a new government, and, in August 2021, withdrew, leaving behind a country the Taliban retook in 11 days. 4 decades, 4 phases of conflict, a generation that has known nothing but war as the background condition of existence, who plan their lives in the spaces between crises. Afghanistan is one of the most heavily mined countries on Earth. Since 1988, over 41,000 civilians have been killed or wounded by landmines and unexploded ordnance. More than 2/3 were children. The Halo Trust has cleared over 800,000 landmines and 11 million pieces of unexploded ordnance since 1988, an extraordinary achievement that has not been enough. Contamination still affects roughly 1/5 of the country. The International Committee of the Red Cross manufactures tens of thousands of prosthetic limbs in Afghanistan every year. That a humanitarian organization has built a permanent prosthetics manufacturing operation in a single country is among the most quietly devastating statistics in the landscape of Afghan suffering. And yet the demoners, Afghan men and women who walk into contaminated fields with metal detectors and probes, converting dangerous land back into simply land, describe their work in terms beyond employment. They are giving back land. The work is dangerous. They keep showing up. Kabul's Darul Aman Palace was built in the 1920s by King Amanullah Khan, who had just led Afghanistan to full independence from British influence, and wanted a building that announced his country's modernity to the world. It was burned and rocketed during the Civil War, reduced to a shell, its columns standing in a ruin that became one of the most photographed images in Afghanistan. The palace, built to represent a hopeful future, became a monument to everything that interrupted it. In recent years, restoration work has begun. Someone decided this ruin should not remain a ruin, that the interrupted future should be resumed rather than abandoned. That decision, small, practical, architectural, is also a philosophical statement. It says that what was destroyed is not accepted as the final word. Here is what 4 decades of war took from Afghanistan. It took the orchards of the Shamali Plain, the Karaz systems of the south, unmaintained and collapsed, the Kabul Museum's collection, the Bactrian gold, the Gandharan sculptures, 5,000 years of civilization scattered to collections around the world that will never return them. An entire generation of educated Afghans, doctors, engineers, teachers, artists, who fled and built their lives elsewhere. It took the Bamiyan Buddhas. It tried to take the music. Here is what it couldn't take. It could not take the Khares building knowledge, held in the minds of men who learned it from their fathers, in an unbroken chain of transmission that no bomb can interrupt because it lives in people rather than in structures. It could not take the carpet patterns. Women who fled to refugee camps in Pakistan and Iran took their looms, or built new ones and kept weaving. The patterns traveled in memory. Across borders, the weavers were not permitted to cross freely. It could not take the poetry. Rumi is not in a museum that can be looted. Kushal Khan Katak is not in a building that can be burned. They are in the mouths of people who learned them as children and will recite them to their children in whatever circumstances those children are living. Poetry in an oral culture is the most durable storage medium ever devised. It requires no electricity, no internet connection, no political permission. Only a human memory and the willingness to speak. It could not take the hospitality. In every account of journalists and aid workers and the rare travelers who have moved through Afghanistan in the difficult years, the consistent, repeated, almost bewildering detail is this: the people are extraordinarily kind. A stranger asking for water receives a meal. A lost traveler asking for directions is walked personally to their destination. This is Melmastia, operating exactly as it was designed to operate, under exactly the conditions of hardship that make genuine hospitality most costly and most meaningful. The war cannot reach the thing that produces it. It destroys infrastructure, institutions, buildings, and fields. But it cannot destroy values held not in buildings but in the character of a people, formed over millennia, tested repeatedly, and found, repeatedly, to be more durable than the forces arrayed against them. There are Afghans in Toronto and Hamburg and Sydney, and in Fremont, California, called Little Kabul, who wake up every morning and make decisions shaped by a country they may not have seen in decades. They send money home. They maintain the culture in the new places. Afghan restaurants where the Kabuli pulao is made from the same recipe the cook's grandmother used in Herat. Cultural associations that organize Nowruz celebrations, that teach children born in Germany or Canada to speak Dari, that bring rubab players to perform foyer audiences who cry at the sound of an instrument they may be hearing for the first time, but feel, somehow, that they already know. And some of them go back. Doctors who return to open clinics where clinics are most needed. Engineers who come back to rebuild water systems. The people who make this decision describe, with remarkable consistency, a feeling of rightness, of being finally in the place where their skills and their identity align with what is most needed. The diaspora is not separate from Afghanistan. It is Afghanistan extended across the world, a network of people carrying the country inside them, waiting for the conditions that would allow them to bring it home. There is a concept in Afghan culture that might be translated, approximately, as stubborn hope. Not optimism. The Afghans who have lived through the last 4 decades are not optimists in that sense. They have seen too much, but stubborn hope is different. It is the decision, made daily, renewed daily, to act as if the future is worth building toward. To plant an orchard whose fruit you may not live to eat. To repair a Karez the next season's fighting might destroy again. To send your child to school in the morning, despite everything you know about how quickly the world can change. It is the wedding celebrated in the middle of war, the music playing, the dancing happening, joy insisted upon with a defiance that is not denial, but the opposite of denial. A full acknowledgement of everything that is wrong, combined with the refusal to let that acknowledgement be the last word. It is the baker who opens his tandoor before dawn every morning, in every season, under every government, because the bread needs to be made and the neighborhood needs to eat, and those two facts have not changed. It is the woman who keeps weaving, the elder who keeps reciting poetry, the farmer who keeps reading the sky for rain, the child who keeps flying kites, which they do still in Kabul, the bright paper diamonds rising above the rooftops, pulling against their strings, bright against the gray winter sky. Kite flying was banned under the first Taliban government. It resumed after 2001. It was restricted again after 2021, and still, in the yards, in the open lots, in the moments where it is possible, the kites go up. Because this is what Afghanistan has always done with the things that try to take it apart. It waits. It holds its knowledge in the only place that cannot be destroyed. It finds the gradient, like the Karez, and it keeps moving, underground if necessary, invisible if necessary, slow if necessary, until it finds the surface again and emerges, flowing and clear, into the light. That is the Afghan story, not the war, not the headlines, not the geopolitical significance of a landlocked country at the intersection of everyone else's interests. The water that keeps running, the people who keep making bread, the kite that keeps rising.